like to welcome all of you here. I'm Gary Lass, I'm the CEO of the Y, and we're thrilled that you've come take part in this discussion. This is just the first of many, and I told Jeffrey if we have one person, we're going to carry through with this to start this up to continue to make a better community for Shreveport-Bossier. We had the desire and the vision to build this, and actually Bubba was one of the first guys I went and talked to. He said, "You think I'm crazy?" He said, I'll support that if it's nice. I've had other people say, why are you going to spend that much money painting a gym? They don't get it, you know. And this group of people get it. You get it because you come to listen, and we want to change the thought process, change the attitude of Shreveport-Bossier in this community to make it better. There's too many good things going on to not do this. So Jeffrey Goodman is our Director of Marketing and Development, and he's going to explain to you the format and who these folks are. Some of you all know them, but just kind of what we're going to be doing. But I appreciate you again for coming out and listening to this.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. Can you hear me? Gary, first off, thank you for letting me kind of run with this idea. I appreciate it. And I wanted to thank Melody Sparks, who's behind the camera. Melody is our intern from BRF's DMI. So I could not have done tonight's event without Melody. She did all the artwork, and she did the programs that you guys have, and she's done a great job for us. So I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to go real fast, cover a few things. First off, how this came about. So truthfully, this came about, oh, and I want to thank the panelists too for being here. Thank you guys so much for agreeing to be a part of this. So this came about, honestly, I blame Bubba. I ran into Bubba a couple of times over the last few months, and he has such a interesting perspective on this community, on philanthropy, on giving, and he's a great talker, and it's just fascinating to sit back and listen to him. And so after we had 2 or 3 conversations, I felt like more people needed to be fascinated like I was, sitting back and listening to him. And from there, I had some conversations with my mom and just said, what do you think about doing this? I've had a lifetime of these kinds of discussions we're going to have today, watching my mom do everything she's done throughout her career. And then I sat down with Christy Gustafson and said, you know, what do you think about this? And Christy had the idea of Councilman Nicholson and Dr. Thomas. So we have a real power panel tonight. I couldn't have put it together by myself, so I really credit Christy for helping us put this all together. In terms of how this is going to work, I'm not going to go over the bios for each of these folks because I'm only going to speak for an hour, and if I did the bios, that would take up the first half hour of the hour. So you have all of their bios on the programs with you, so I'll spare you that. A couple other things I wanted to cover real fast. First off, this is the first of a series of these types of community-focused and minded discussions that we plan to have at the Y. So look for more of these, slightly different topics each time, slightly different panelists, but we want to engage in this way more. We feel like this is our role and our responsibility, and we want to execute on that. And then lastly, just so all of you know, I'm gonna spend the first hour asking the panelists questions. Some of the questions are for all of them to answer, which I'll specify. Some of them are gonna be directed specifically to one of the panelists. None of the panelists have seen any of the questions, so they're answering all of these off the cuff tonight. So know that. I thought that was an important element. I thought that was an important element of tonight's discussion. So I'll ask questions for the first hour. The final 30 minutes we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions. Thank you all for making the time to be here. This is going to be really fun, so sit back. Okay, so the first question is to all 4 of you, and it is, Shreveport-Bossier, by and large, strikes me as having a self-esteem problem. In other words, all my life, it seems people are more ashamed than proud to be from here. All of you are different in that respect. And so I'd like each of you, starting with Bubba and Let's Go, in order to talk about how you learned to be prideful of Shreveport-Bossier.
That's broad. Very interesting question for everyone in the room. It begins at home. I'm a product of, funny, true story. My dad blew through Shreveport with 8 or 9 mules, up jump tractor. He went broke. I got born in Shreveport. Then he got drafted into World War II. Think about that. My mother from Mississippi, and we had chickens in the backyard at 808 McCormick Street to eat, not for entertainment. So you grow up in that environment. It was my town. It was my place. And I did have the opportunity, because my mother drove the station wagon that picked up the kids to go to Southfield so that I could go to Southfield. And I went to Southfield, Broadmoor Junior High, Bird, etc. The reason for return is a little cloudy in my mind. I had a dynamic, interesting father that somehow I felt, I don't know, maybe it was insecurity, but I needed to come back and work on the family farm, which in that case was Forest Park Cemetery. So you come back, start mowing grass and digging graves. I'm not positive about that decision because I had all sorts of opportunities from other people, other places, more charming, more dynamic, but it wasn't about money. I came home. And sadly, if you take my class from Bird High School, graduation class 1959, Johnny Dalton's the Secretary of the Navy, and Mike Griffith invented the pantyhose, and you go to and they didn't come back because there wasn't any jobs. We were all just middle class kids that grew up over there. And okay, but we have lost our self-respect, and they're good things. Now we've grown from within, but there's so many good things. We're not telling that story. I mean, look where we are. This is a world-class facility that does, when you say world-class, it does perfect things for the community, perfect things. It couldn't be done by anything else. With philanthropic dollars, and then you pay to, you don't get a towel anymore, but I mean, my point is, you can be there. And that's very healthy, and it reinvigorates my sense of community spirit, and then citizenship, because I know we must collectively do this, or we become another piece of litter on the landscape, and that's no good.
Well, I'm not from here. I'm from a town in Mississippi that had 2 streets, basically. And so Shreveport, and I went to college in New Orleans. So I came from New Orleans with my husband to train here. And when we came to look at Shreveport, before he accepted an internship, the first thing that impressed me were the rose bushes everywhere. Now that may sound silly to some of you, but there was a man that was employed by the city that was real into roses. And there were beautiful roses on the neutral grounds and all around Shreveport. And I immediately thought, a city that devotes that much energy and money and time to roses, has to be a good place to live. And then I found out there was a symphony and there was an opera. And I thought, that is really impressive that we have a symphony and an orchestra and a ballet. And those things are what attracted me to Shreveport in the first place. And we did have some friends who lived here, some college friends. And they introduced us to more friends, and then we had all of our medical friends. But from the very first, I'll have to say, I was teaching at Midway Junior High, and the secretary there said, I have a good friend that I want you to meet. And that good friend happened to be Virginia Sheehy. And Virginia immediately put me on the board of the symphony and got me involved. And so I had felt like Shreveport took me in, and I wanted to give back because it was so good to me that I've always felt that I wanted to give back to Shreveport.
Okay, well, good afternoon, well, good evening, everyone. I was born and raised here, and I remember when I was in high school, back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a very big racial divide in Shreveport, and I think there still is, but it was really bad in the late 80s and early 90s. And I told myself if I ever left Shreveport, I was never coming back. My parents encouraged me to go away to school, to see the rest of the world, and to do something different. I ended up going to college in New Haven, Connecticut. I graduated from Yale University. And I then said, I will never come back to Shreveport, if only to visit. Medical school took me to New Orleans. And I said, that's a great place to visit, but I would never want to live in New Orleans. Relationships, family really brought me back home. I thought my next stop was Dallas, Texas, or Arkansas to train and do my residency. But I came back home to Shreveport. You know, you look at the landscape of the community, and I tell my residents now, when I was an intern at LSU Shreveport back in 2000, I was the only intern of color that came to this city. So, you know, being the first is not abnormal for me, but it was home. My parents are here, my parents are still here. My children are here. My closest friends have come and gone. But Shreveport, it's just home for me. It's good, it's bad, it's got potential, and it has afforded me the opportunity to serve people who put so much into me. So when I think about Shreveport, I think about, you know, being a professor in the Department of Pediatrics and being able to train residents and teach them equitable health care and, you know, share what I may not have been given growing up with them. Able to mentor students that not only look like me, but have shared experiences. And I think that our community is a place where we can really grow what we have and learn to appreciate more all the gifts that this community has given to us. So Shreveport is home, and my husband's from here, he practices here, and you know, I think that if Shreveport is gonna be a better community, I think that more of maybe my generation should take pride in what the community has given us and then seek ways to share that with our children.
I also was born and raised in Shreveport, and I will say that as a child, I had no concept of our collective self-esteem problem. I loved growing up in Shreveport. My parents moved here in the 70s so that my dad could attend medical school. He had a great career as an oncologist for 40 years and loved the hospital that he worked at, the people that he worked with, and the patients that he served. I went to St. Joseph's in Loyola growing up for school and just really loved everything about my childhood here.
I was surprised as an adult when I became aware of how many people thought differently about our city. Like others up here on the panel, I went away for school. I went to follow my then girlfriend and now wife of 20 years, Emily, to TCU, and then went to the University of Virginia for law school, practiced law in Dallas for several years. And there were nice things about Charlottesville, and there are nice things about Dallas, but only Shreveport has ever felt like home to me. And there are so many fantastic things about this city. It's a really wonderful place to raise children. It's an easy place to do business and just move about. When I can bring myself to come to this world-class facility, I have a beautiful place to exercise, although I find a reason to sit on the couch and have a glass of bourbon more often than I do that. But, I think that serving on the city council for the past 3 years has both deepened my appreciation for the city and made me even more aware of how dissatisfied some parts of the city are with their experience. And I think we can both love the city and support the city and work together to make it better and acknowledge that there are opportunities for improvement. There are certainly parts of this city's past that are very painful and that continue to impact life today. And I'm aware, and my family is aware, that the life that we have had has in some respects been more privileged than the life that other people have experienced. But I really believe that if people in leadership positions and people whose voices are heard by many ears will consistently share the good things about Shreveport rather than focus on the negative, we will all be much better off. Thanks.
So this next question is for Sylvia. The question is, I'm not asking you to judge, but if someone came to you and wanted your opinion on whether or not he or she is giving back to the community enough, how would you determine that?
Well, first of all, I'd have to know more about the person, what the person's resources were, how much free time the person has, because not everyone can give money, and money is not the solution to all of our problems. But most people have some time to give, whether it's an hour a week or whether it's, 8 hours a day. Every little bit helps. And I know just from going with a group to the food bank and loading groceries in boxes at the food bank, you can spend 1 hour and affect probably 20 families by just boxing food. You don't have to have any skills. All you have to do is have 2 hands, pick up and put in a box. And so my answer to anybody is, unless you're physically not able, mentally not able, or so burdened with responsibility, give back a little, whatever that little is that you have. Give some of it back.
The next question is for you, John. I have friends that work in nonprofits in other cities. In those cities, it seems that philanthropy and or volunteerism are more fashionable or cool than they are perhaps here. Is that something you believe we can change? If so, how?
Well, I don't know if I agree with your friends. I don't know where they live, but I will say that, especially the past 3 years in local office, I've had contact with lots of really great nonprofits and charities that do so much for Shreveport. You mentioned Christy Gustafson, She leads the Community Foundation, which is an amazing organization that manages well very significant resources that are deployed to support all kinds of nonprofit activities in our community. Another charity that I really admire and is run by a lady I practiced with for years, Lisa Cronin, is Common Ground. Amazing work in Cedar Grove, gives people ranging from 13 years old to senior citizens the opportunity to contribute to the Cedar Grove community in all kinds of ways. I went this week to a banquet, a volunteer appreciation banquet for Volunteers of America. Chuck Meehan and his staff are just some of the most fantastic people. And I joke with Chuck that he's like Jesus' emissary that I've known since I was 7 years old, right? He's just this amazing person, and he's devoted his whole life to just doing good for others, and you know, his wife and his family as well. So I have a sense that charitable work and nonprofit work is fashionable in Shreveport. We can always do more, you know, to Sylvia's point, and I think we ought to always encourage everyone to do what they can. That's different for everybody. And I will say on that front that I think it's important to convey the message that all giving back does not have to be heroic or cataclysmically sacrificial, right? Because sometimes people look out into the world at the city, at all the problems that we have, and they're big and they're generational, and it just seems like there's no way to get your arms around them. You just have to convince people to sort of eat the elephant one bite at a time, to do what they can to contribute in a manner consistent with the resources that God has given them. And I know a lot of people, like the people that I've mentioned just now and others, who do a really exceptional job at that in Shreveport. So tell your friends it's fashionable here.
Dr. Wanda, the next question is for you. There are so many organizations, so many causes, so many different people probably wanting you to give to them, serve on their boards, help them in some way or another. How do you determine how to prioritize your giving?
Me personally? Okay. I guess my mantra is God, family, and everything else. So I make sure that anything that is faith-based, that gives me a space to not only practice my faith, but to help other people, I try to be a part of. So I'm very active in my church, family. I belong to a lot of community organizations. My husband says too many. But I have organizations that really target my children and helping them learn to give and learn to volunteer. I have organizations that target me and what I can do to benefit the community on different levels, maybe on educational level, philanthropic level, more of a friendship level. So when people ask me to serve, now I'm at the point now where I look around the table and I see who's there, because I want to be impactful with the limited amount of time I think I have. But also I think, and I have come to realize that I have a very unique position in this community, and I'm very grateful for it. I think having a platform at the medical school where my voice is heard, where I feel that I have a seat at the table, I'm obligated to bring others with me. So even in this room today, there's only one other person here that looks like me. But that doesn't mean that my voice isn't to be heard. And that doesn't mean that there are other people outside that want to come in. And so when I go and I'm invited to join boards or organizations, I always look for a way to make it more inclusive. And that if it's a philanthropic organization, that the dollars that are spent in an equitable way. so that everyone in the community benefits. Because if everybody benefits, then everybody wins.
Bubba, the next question is for you. Do you feel like Shreveport-Bossier is improving as you age, or do you feel like it is losing some of its appeal or value? What makes you answer either way?
First of all, I'm not aging. It's the town that quit on me. No, I think having watched a community for my entire life, and then as you mature, I mean, just life, you go forward, you learn those lessons of things that work, don't work, and then you watch certain personalities, and it's called leadership. And the demography of our community has changed dramatically. And you've got to have leadership to have unity. And there has to be a sense, in my perspective, people want to go where there's freedom and liberty. That exists in this community, and you can't, there's opportunity for anybody that will avail themselves of the opportunity. It starts with education. But then, I don't know, there seems to be a gap about what's the responsibility of a citizen to give back to the community. You know, who's gonna guard the cattle tonight if we're on the trail? You know, we decide. You know, you and your family are gonna stay up all night to keep the lions and tigers away. And then who's gonna be, and you delegate, because you don't get to participate in the total, the safety, or the communal food unless you contribute. There doesn't seem to be, sadly, enough reaction to non-contribution. Did I say that correctly without, jumping up and down? But we don't, as a culture, infer that you don't get to do this unless you contribute to the total. I mean, is this open? Is the why and all the dollars that went into this building, beginning with BP and all the stuff and all the people that have given money and everything else, but it won't operate if just people come and use it and then discard it. Take what they can and leave. And that's cultural. We've got to teach that. And then you teach that by example. A lot of times, good example, is on blind eyes and deaf ears. I want that. I think it'll change. We have good examples of that.
John, this next question's for you. Covered it a little bit, but how do you personally recommend that someone make time to give back to the Shreveport-Bossier community?
Well, I think your mother did a good job in answering a previous question of saying that everybody's resources are different. And this is normative and not necessarily descriptive of my own life. I may give advice tonight that I haven't always followed, but we all have, to your point, sort of concentric circles of responsibility in life, and you have to take care of your own family and its needs. And once you've done that well and appropriately, you can move outward to your church community and to your neighborhood and to your city. So I don't know that I've very often had someone come to me and say, how much should I be contributing and how should I do it in terms of giving back? But if someone were to put that question to me as you just have, I would say, remember that charity begins at home, and that the first and best way that you can make your community stronger is to make your own family stronger, and to focus on meeting the needs of the people in your immediate sphere. And if you don't do that, then you're making a mistake. I talked just a few minutes ago about the fact that I don't think that giving back needs to be cataclysmically sacrificial is what I said. By that, I just mean that you want to look for opportunities that are impactful. You don't want to waste the limited time that we all have, no matter what our role in life may be. But you also have to make sure that what you are committing to do with your time is sustainable from your perspective. So look for opportunities that fit into your other obligations. Look for opportunities where you will make a difference, and for opportunities that will not prevent you from continuing to meet your other immediate obligations. And I guess another thought I'll offer in my final minute in response to this question is, in terms of finding impactful opportunities, there are some things, some roles that lots of great people want to do, right? And so if you are one of many wonderful, qualified people who want to fill a position on a board or hold a particular role in an organization or hold elected office, then maybe you doing it doesn't move the needle that much. But there are other opportunities that are thankless and nobody wants to do. And if you find yourself in a one-person line for a job that's of significant consequence, maybe you ought to do that job rather than one that might be more personally satisfying, but that has many wonderful candidates who are interested in filling.
Thank you. Wanda, Dr. Wanda, the next question's for you. What makes you optimistic about Shreveport-Bossier, or in other words, what makes you feel like it is worth giving to?
Well, I think every Tuesday at 2:30, I pretty much answer that question because the medical students always ask me, like, what do you like about Shreveport? Why are you still in Shreveport? What can I do if I come to medical school in Shreveport? So we have all these bright eyes that want to come to Shreveport. So I get a chance to show us off on a weekly basis. So why Shreveport? I mean, it's home. There are just amazing people here. Like I said, lifelong friends, like-minded people. The community is large enough for you to meet different people, but it's small enough for you to know everybody. I was talking to a friend in Baton Rouge this past weekend. We were taking my daughter to a dance competition, and I was saying, I was like, Sheila, do you know Sonia? And she was like, no. I was like, of course you do. You know Sonia. Because in Shreveport, I'm like, do you know Jeffrey? Like, Jeffrey, you know Jeffrey. I was like, yeah, I know Jeffrey. That's my Shreveport. So you try to connect people, by 6 degrees here. So there's so many things about this community that make it home. And I think that one thing that I tell even my children, you can fly anywhere, but you can always come home. And when I left, my dad told me he'd always keep the light on. So I could always come back to Twilight Lane if I could go nowhere else. And I think that spirit has lived in me. And so, this is my home, and this is a place that I want to make better. And so I tell prospective students that come, look for things in the community that you're passionate about, because they're here, and if they're not, you can create them, and help be a part of the solution and not the problem.
Sylvia, next question is for you. How did you learn the importance of giving your time and/or money to your community?
I grew up with a very philanthropic mother. From the time I was a little girl, I was setting tables and counting poker chips for a casino night, for a hospital in Jerusalem. house was like Grand Central Station. There was no hotel in my town after about my 5th grade. And so anybody coming through, traveling salesman, my parents had a clothing store, so traveling salesmen would come and stay with us. A family of strangers once had an accident outside our town. A child was killed and another child was badly injured. My mother heard about it and moved the family into our house. They lived with us for months, and when the child that was in the hospital recuperated enough to come to our house, she shared my bed for months. It was just the way I grew up. That's what you did. You filled whatever need was there. When I moved to Shreveport, well, I did a little bit in college. I volunteered at an orphanage in New Orleans while I was in college. But when I moved to Shreveport, the people that I admired and wanted to be friends with were all involved people. They were all doing good things in Shreveport. And frankly, those are still the people that I admire and like and want to be with. I'm not very interested in people who are self-centered and do nothing with their time except stuff for themselves. And I like being in the company of people like this. They stimulate me, they make me feel good about the world, and they make me happy. And because they're doing good stuff, and that just energizes me. I want to be with these people. I want to do with what they're doing. And Bubba and I have a long history together, and it's just fun. It's fun to be working on something where you're making a difference. It's just, that's one of my greatest joys, is knowing that what I'm doing is making a difference.
Doc, I feel a dinner party invitation coming on.
I know. This is my lunch.
Bubba, this next question's for you. What does one gain personally, either by donating time or money to charitable organizations? What are the personal benefits? How does it make you feel when you give?
I'll give you some Bubba eyes around the deal. We all have talents, or we come to know our talents. A truly introspective person comes to a realization that you can't play the guitar, but you can grow good tomatoes. Something. But you do find out what your talents are that you've been gifted with. And then we've alluded to it, we all have time. That's the most precious thing we have, and we can give that, and within that time frame, you can share your talents. A talent, a specific one. And then I think how I feel. I react differently, and this is a little stretch in semantics here, but charity to me is an instant response to a not foreseen event. It's a tragedy or a calamity that needs at the moment dollars or time. Philanthropy to me, that is a long term. It is far more studied. And someone mentioned, is it maintainable? And how long are you going to give a certain amount of money? But when money runs out, then the deal goes off the end of the earth for lack of a second. Now, if you care about it enough and you got enough money and time, it becomes yours and you're it. But then ultimately, what is that to the community when you leave the scene? I don't get a particular euphoric or attaboy feeling about myself, because I'm afraid somebody's going to say, oh, no, you shouldn't. I'm afraid my dad will be there and say, no, you shouldn't. You didn't do that. You were motivated by the wrong thing. I think when people give, if there's a pure heart in the giver and a pure heart in the receive, that's enough. And I have often felt like you feel bad. I wish I could do more. You gave all your time that you could afford as it relates to your family obligation. Or if you had a particular incident or thing that you'd say, Lord, I wish I had more dollars that I could contribute to this cause, because I think it's so worthwhile for the community. Most of the time I think instead of what the question is, it's feeling bad about not able to do more, as opposed to what you feel like if you did. Because I feel like what you did, you were obligated to do.
Okay, so this next question is for Sylvia and Bubba. Let's start with Sylvia. It's a long question. You have completed some very large community projects in your lifetime and faced a tremendous amount of rejection along the way. I think there are many people that want to make our community better, but either don't know where to start or begin and then face so many obstacles that they end up losing interest. How do you recommend that someone stay hopeful and determined in his or her community efforts, that he or she stay a course that will inevitably be wrought with more challenges and setbacks than successes?
First of all, I think you have to be hard-headed. You just have to say, okay, this is important, and I'm gonna make it happen, or with my team, we're gonna make it happen. Because for sure you're gonna have setbacks. There's not gonna be enough money. There's not gonna be enough time. There's gonna be people griping, people that promise to help you but flake on you. That's just all part of any community work. And you just have to care enough. I mean, gosh. And you also have to have a thick skin, because there are going to be people who are supposedly helping you that are really behind your back saying, why is she doing it like that? Or it could be done better by somebody else. And so you just have to brush all that aside and say, okay, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I think it's important. And if I think it's important, then nothing is going to get in my way. I'm going to make it happen.
For me? The tenacity, perseverance, I'm sitting next to it. And but then there is a consistency. Without my philanthropic effort is of more value than yours. None of us like that. None of us like being the intimation that this is your fair share, because we think you have more financial capacity, you could do more. Well, that's a terrible negative. And it's like someone, if you've taken a couple of kids on a Boy Scout deal, well, you could have done more on that, and they were playing golf somewhere. You know, those kind of things happen, or you feel it. But it basically turns into an evaluation of yourself. Again, back to being humbly perseverant about the cause. Now, it has to be in your soul, the cause, whatever that may be. And it used to be, you know, olden times, they'd give you 5 cards, and, you know, maybe I got 5 of you guys and you got mine next time, and we went around and gave out cards. But then you start realizing, am I doing that in an obligatory way, that I'm just supposed to do that. Then as you mature within a community, you start finding those things that you perceive from your perspective to be more meaningful, or they touch your heart because of some incident or personality, or you like the music. You sitting in the Strand Theater to listen to the Shreveport Symphony elevated me, you know, and I might not look like that person, but I am in fact that person. And I did it often by myself. So when you assess yourself, you find out, then you say, it's not like, why don't you understand and enjoy what I enjoy? And that could be anything. You don't want to get too far out in the weeds on something like that.
John, this next one's for you. Where do you feel Shreveport-Bossier's identity is? If someone asked you where you live, how would you describe it?
Well, I think I would pitch all the good qualities that I've described the city as having in response to a previous question. I would tell people that this is a very welcoming place in my experience. It is a wonderful place to raise a family. I think I also would say, as I mentioned previously, that we do have a painful component to our history. And, you know, the doctor made some comments about there still being a racial divide in the city, and there absolutely is. And I didn't know this story until I was elected to the council, but this week the council issued a formal apology to members of a church, an African American church, who were in the middle of a church service in the 60s and had law enforcement ride horses through their church and forcibly remove their pastor and just desecrate the place. I mean, there are still people alive today who personally experienced that. So, I guess it would depend on the context of the question that was put to me. If I were trying to pitch the city to an executive making an investment, I would omit some of the negative. But if I were having a really honest conversation about Shreveport, I would say that we're a place with a beautiful culture and a rich history, but still with some challenges in terms of achieving the unity that we really are going to have to achieve to move this place forward. And I don't have the answer. I don't know how we get there, but I think to start the process, we have to be willing to have really open and respectful conversations about the city's history, and we have to recognize how that history impacts the present so that we can work together to move toward a productive and happy future.
Dr. Wanda, this question's for you. Many cities similar size to us have large universities and/or sports teams that bring the community together. We probably will never have either of those things in Shreveport-Bossier. What do you see that can help unify us more in the future as a community, or help bring us together more than we are today?
That's a good question. Let's see, what can unify us? Well, I think there are a lot of things in Shreveport that unify us. I mean, you know, the Revel. I love the Revel. It's Shreveport. The way that Mardi Gras has grown in our community, I think that there is an opportunity to unify the city. You know, I have been to the Mardi Gras Ball with Centaur. I've been to the Mardi Gras Ball with Sobek and Harambe. And you know, that highlights our divide oftentimes. I think that the things that are positive about our city, you know, the restaurants, the food, just the culture of the sportsman paradise, the lakes and the outdoor activities. I think those are things that can unify our community. I think that we have to have those conversations. You know, there are a lot of unspoken things about Shreveport because I was born and raised here. I definitely know them. And I think that, you know, my generation or my older daughter's generation definitely, they are more open to those conversations. They are not satisfied with the status quo. They're not satisfied in certain people live in certain zip codes and other people live in other zip codes. Certain communities represent this and other communities represent that. I'm very hopeful that you know, my children and my children's children will be able to see past a lot of things that were just a part of Shreveport when I was growing up. And so, you know, I'm very hopeful that future generations, if they will stay and invest in our community, will absolutely make it a more unified community.
So that's the end of my questions. Before I open it up to the audience, I was going to see if any of you four wanted to add something to what we've already discussed, or you want to just move to questions from the audience. Okay. So we'll open it up to questions from the audience. I can bring a mic to you. If you have a question, just hop on in. Please feel free to take advantage of this panel of very thoughtful folks that we have here today.
I just want to say, I was telling some of the panel members before this started, I was born and raised here, and I never wanted to stay here. I couldn't wait to get out. And when I married on a condition that we would stay here for 2 years, he would wrap up his law practice, and we'd get out. 10 years later, I said, okay, this is the 2-year warning. Either we go together or, and I left. And I left for 17 years. And I was not coming back. And then my family had a meeting without me and said, guess who's coming back to take care of the parents in their 90s? And it was me. Well, my last parent passed away. It's been now 9 years, and I'm still here. And I was surprised at how much Shreveport had changed. I moved back in 2008, and I told people that even 5 years before that, I wouldn't have considered coming back. I would have brought my parents to Oregon or found someplace for them to be, but I wasn't going to come here. But I came back, and I was surprised because it had changed. And Sylvia, you pointed out, people would ask me, what's Shreveport like? I said, well, our population is around 200,000, it used to be. But we have a symphony, and we have an opera, and we have about 6 live theater groups. I think we have more now. You're kidding, y'all have all that? And it made me start realizing, as I told people while I was away, and then when I came back and saw, we'd added the Robinson Film Center. LSU Med Center had grown tremendously. The talent that LSU Med Center has brought to this city is amazing. We started having magnet schools. I think there's a lot, and I'm one of those who is negative a lot of the time, and yet I've stayed here. I bought my family home. I'm living in the house I was brought home to as an infant from Shreveport Hospital. But at the same time, when I come to something like this, it makes me start thinking, we really do have a lot of good. And I think the one really, pardon the pun, dark mark against Shreveport is our lack of unity. I worked in race relations in the 80s in Shreveport. Gannett gave us a grant. And when I came back in 2008, I got involved in Mac McCarter's group. And we did these tours, and we went around, and I was going, wait a minute, this is what we did. We were doing this in 1988. Nothing had changed in that regard, and that's my biggest disappointment. And I love what you said about how we can do it, but I'd like some of the other panel members to give us their ideas on how do we bring that unity. To me, that's the one thing Shreveport is lacking so much. We have such a racial divide. Yes, we have a black mayor. Yes, we have black people in positions of authority in the city government and in businesses. But at the community level, it's not there. How do we get it?
It gets, we mentioned the word leadership, and leadership isn't, you know, Jack Reacher walking in the door. This is citizens that are bright, intellectually capable, that have taken advantage of their educational opportunities. And that's across the board. The demography in this community has changed dramatically, and anybody that wants to talk about almost any issue that faces our community without that being at the forefront, what Wanda was talking about, is less observant than they're unrealistically not observant. All right, well then, how does that relate? We've got, as collectively, we all want to make money. You have to be able to live here unless you're gifted and artistic, but we've got to have people that, and economic opportunity for everybody that employs anybody that has availed themselves of education and has a work ethic. We got way too many in the United States of America, but in our community, reflective of the country, that are non-contributors, don't, and there are reasons for that. Some of it is generational, that somebody else does it, whatever it is. Someone else causes the why to be here. No, that's not true. We cause it to be here. And there seems to me sometimes a lack of, I was always struck by one time in the Boy Scouts, a person came up and said, how much do you pay to be a scout leader? I have some interest. I just didn't believe it. I was in the Byrd High School auditorium trying to recruit people to join and be there. And the person asked, well, I don't think it was because they honestly didn't have the concept of contribution. And it's teaching that to the mid-generation. And then, as I said, we must, as a community, and the African American community, political power, there's responsibility for all of us. And when you get elected, you know, I always think about the word service. What do you get elected for? All too often, it's what I get out of it rather than how can I serve. Is reflective in the actions of some. Now, that's not true across the board, and it's not accusatory about anybody. But you look at the great, interesting, transformative personalities that can be within a 3-block neighborhood. They're there for service. And I don't think sometimes we look that deep about what our motivation is for our involvement. I didn't mean to get all philosophical there. But,
We got another question.
It'll be difficult to follow the colorful sentiments of this nice young lady. But I lived in Shreveport as a child and moved back during COVID because in the early stages of COVID, unbeknownst to me, what would happen physically based on some pre-existing conditions and fortunately nothing going on in 2 years. But I chose to move back to Shreveport because of the it's a raspberry. My stepfather was a class of 49 at Burgers, so wonderful people. But I chose to move back to Shreveport because, again, the loyalty of childhood friends I've known for 42 years.
Speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Speak up a little.
I'm sorry. I chose to move back to Shreveport early in COVID because of relationships and friendships that have been in existence since 1979. And this question is for the board, specifically for Dr. Thomas and Mr. Nicholson. To what do you attribute the loyalty, regardless of race, creed, or color, of people from Northwest Louisiana, Shreveport specifically? And secondarily to that, how do you think moving forward, regardless of race, creed, color, again, we can build that sort of support and loyalty for lifelong friendships? Because Mr. Nicholson, I know several people from your class as well. I can run into people on the street who I haven't seen in 30 years, and will hug like we're still on playing pickup basketball at Asian Steers. It's incredible. So, to what do you attribute that loyalty and connection to friendships that make someone like me, who's lived in Boston, Los Angeles, and all over, to come back to Shreveport going forward? Because, truthfully, I thought, if I'm going to die around the people I love the most and for whom I have the most loyalty and I feel the most love for.
Okay, well, you know, some of my best friends, like you said, I mean, they're from Shreveport. I have friends who still live here. You know, we have girls' night out. You know, I think, you know, I don't know if my experience, well, I guess if you group people, I probably have had a different cultural experience here in Shreveport. I danced with Shreveport Metropolitan Ballet growing up, so the arts was always a part of my life. So, you know, there may have been 2 other young ladies of color that danced with me. So I had a whole circle of friends that were pretty much Caucasian. I went to Cattle Magnet. And, you know, interestingly, since I have 3 minutes, so when I was in high school, and people who are from my generation used to have senior parties. Anybody remember senior? Okay, senior parties. Okay, so in Shreveport, at most of the high schools, if not all the high schools, there was a black senior party and there was a white senior party. Right? Okay. So my class at Cattle Magnet decided that we weren't going to do that. Now I was a class president, and so I still have my class T-shirt. And there was this rap song in the 90s that said, "You can get with this, or you can get with that." That's what it said. And so our T-shirt had one group of people here, so you can get with this, or you can get with that, but we got with this, and we were all in one class. We had one senior party. I mean, like my class reunions were all on Facebook and stuff. Now I don't do a lot of social media, but we still connect with people. Jeffrey went to middle school together. I mean, my parents made sure that I got a chance to really see what the world could be, the opportunities, because they weren't always right in front of us here in Shreveport. And I think that they allowed me to dream big, and I was surrounding myself with friends who could dream big. And so for us, it was about being the best person you could be. I think, you know, I had an opportunity to really see the world through different lenses, and I have friends like that. So when I go to lunch with friends, when I think about who supports my children, who supports my family, my parents are educators in the school system, and so I was fortunate enough to appreciate that the world is just not one color. And I think that if something were to happen to me here, I think that I would have that loyalty like you do of people that I really call my friend. And I think that my children are, they benefit from it even more than I do. My younger daughter goes to St. Mark's, and up until this year, she was the only little brown girl in her class, and she's in 4th grade. But my husband and I decided to keep her there because she loves it, and she feels loved, and she doesn't feel judged, and she doesn't feel that she's different. She feels that she is appreciated for being Gabrielle, and that is what I want for her. And so I think that, you know, I have friends like that who appreciated me for that. And so it's important to me that we build a community that makes every child feel that way. And so that's who my friends are. So.
You know, like everybody sitting up here, I feel a really sort of powerful, fundamental loyalty to this place and this community. I mean, not only to particular friends, but in the aggregate. And you know, your question is, why do we feel that way? Why do some of us feel that way? I think the answer for me is that throughout my life, Shreveport has been incredibly supportive of me. I mean, my family, our neighborhood, my church, the schools that I attended. You know, I mentioned that I attended St. Joseph's, and I see Father Pike sitting out there, which makes me think of other priests in my life. But I have the most wonderful memories, just by way of particular example, of Father Clayton from St. Joseph's. And that, I mean, I think human nature is to return love for love, right? Return loyalty for loyalty. And I think that this place and so many of the institutions in our community are really good at nurturing and supporting and loving the people that comprise them. So that, I mean, that's I guess that's the answer for me. That I've been so fortunate to benefit from the experience of Shreveport, which has been so positive for me and my immediate family and my extended family, that I feel very deeply grateful to be from Shreveport, to have grown up here, and to still be here, because it's just brought me and my family a lot of joy over the course of our life.
Can you speak up a little bit or come closer?
Yeah, sorry, and I'm using the microphone too. That's embarrassing. Sorry. I'm Maria Dutan. I guess like a complicated question. I work at Bossier LSU, and my question is regarding the violent gun violence we're seeing, gun violence we're seeing, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, being that it is a major public health crisis, and also to see if you all were a part of a group or organization that was maybe targeting that problem specifically. I work in the core lab, and I just have seen like our blood bank and just the amount of blood that's necessary for these victims that come into the ER or to the emergency room. And it's truly devastating, not to just like the families, of course, of these victims, but to the hospital in general. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And sorry to be a damper, but it's just something, a really important question that I had that I brought with me today. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll take off. Anybody that doesn't think that's the gravest issue in this community don't have their eyes open. Unfortunately, it's from one segment of our community, primarily. And it's trying to fathom what causes a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old person to shoot another 13 or 14-year-old person. It's about conflict resolution. In from my view. It's what the culture that these kids are exposed to, the obscene stuff that's on media and entertainment, which we can't control. Only as a kid, I mean, if you have children, is trying to preserve their innocence. Well, boy, there's no way to do. I mean, it's unbelievable what these undeveloped minds are exposed to. I think if there was an answer, we would all jump on it in a minute. But it comes back to what I said about leadership, and I don't know who. Our job is find out who they relate to. Is it, I watch again, I come back to the why. What here? You have that same age kid here, that's the last thing they're thinking about is finding a gun and shooting somebody. But it is obviously, it's redundant. It's awful, it's terrible. It is eating at the bottom of the core of our community and every community. It's not just here. And it is sadly, dramatically isolated to young African American males. If there was an answer, I go back, Boy Scouts, if you give me some time teaching, you get your hands on these kids. The problem is you can't get your hands on the kids because there's no, it's a family that doesn't exist. And so they find family in the street. And that's a bad family.
Well, I've thought about this and focused a lot of energy and attention on this issue in the years that I've been on the council. I get an email notification every time somebody gets shot in Shreveport as a council member, and you would not believe how many of those notifications I receive. Many more than make the news. I'll give two answers to the question, what do we do about it? One of which Republicans excoriated me for last year, and another which perhaps members of my party will like. The liberal answer, but one that I think is absolutely true, is that we must impose reasonable rules about gun storage and safety. Okay? More than 500 guns are stolen out of cars in Shreveport every year, and a huge number of those are used to commit crimes, and many of the people stealing them are teenagers. I offered legislation last year that ultimately would have required only that if you choose to leave a weapon in your car must be locked. I mean, that was it. I started with the weapon has to be secured, but that was too much. And so I thought surely we can all agree that there should be some penalty for leaving a weapon in a car that is unlocked. And Mayor Perkins and I have not agreed about everything over the past 3 years, but he and I absolutely agreed about this. And I said, Mayor, when you were a military officer, what would happen to one of your men or enlisted ladies who left their weapon unsecured? He said, discipline. Why should the rule be any different for civilians who own weapons that have as their purpose killing other human beings? So at the local level and at the state level, we have got to get away from this nonsense that all regulation of firearms is an oppressive infringement of constitutional rights. It's not. And there is a straight line correlation between the number of deadly weapons that children in our city get their hands on and the number of people they shoot with those weapons. And I don't, the blowback I got on that legislation was so incredible. A former president of the National Rifle Association, right, the NRA, based in D.C., called me at my law office one day and I won't name him because I guess this is going on the interwebs, but he basically told me, you seem like a nice guy with a bright political future, but if you don't drop this third rail, we'll make sure you don't ever get elected anything again. And that was his message to me over what I thought was the most innocuous, most sensible gun legislation that I could come up with. So I implore my Republican colleagues here and everywhere, whoever hears this, take another look at that issue because we can save lives with reasonable regulation of firearms that will not prevent your ability to hunt or your ability to defend yourself with a weapon. So that's the answer the Republicans will not like, and I may get censured by the local party. You never know what will happen if they see this, so don't tell them about it. The answer that, the other answer, Slash. I'll put it this way. I didn't change my legislation. And I've told more than one person that I'd rather serve one term on the city council to the best of my ability and never do anything again than bend to something like that. So I told them in a nice way to stick it. The other reality in this community, and I preface this remark by saying I'm not talking about one elected official because it's not, and I'm not talking about our current DA in particular. I'm talking about the system that we have in place in Caddo Parish, Louisiana. We do not appropriately and consistently punish violent offenders. It does not happen. And if you were to take the time to review just the processing of people charged with very dangerous gun crimes, you would see that it is common for them to receive probation or a very light sentence the first time around. And there are many crimes for which a pass and a second chance with no trip through prison is totally appropriate in my opinion. Nonviolent drug possession, perhaps even your first time selling a small quantity of drugs. Maybe that's something that you can be really rehabilitated out of without having to go to prison. But if you have the propensity and capacity to use a deadly weapon to harm another human being, you must go to prison the first time you demonstrate that propensity and capacity. I mean, see how I'll put this. I see Mr. Jackson, a member of the bar, and I don't want to say more than I'm supposed to as a lawyer about this. I have knowledge of a case in which a young man years ago allegedly engaged in a gun battle with another man who was in his own home defending his family. The victim had his wife and his child behind him, and the defendant allegedly was firing a long gun into this man's home in Shreveport. Okay, and there was no real dispute about those facts. Rather than, and I should say this was under, the DA at the time this happened was Charlie Scott. It was not James Stewart, so this is not a criticism of James Stewart's office. So the first problem with the case was that the defendant was charged not with attempted murder, not with aggravated assault with a firearm, but with illegal use of a weapon, which has a 2-year statutory maximum penalty. Okay? And that defendant ultimately got probation. He did no time in jail or in prison for that offense. And that story has repeated itself for many years. I will say for multiple district attorneys' administrations in this city. It is really, really difficult as a lawyer or as a politician or as any stakeholder to have a conversation about that problem, because the district attorney, whoever he may be, is the most powerful person in the parish. And that's true in every parish in the state, because he has the power to loose or to bind, right? He can decline to prosecute even the most serious offenses, and if you're charged with a crime, he or she has the power to allow you to have nothing happen to you or to plead to a lesser offense. But systemically, we are not doing what we need to do as a city about violent crime in the criminal justice system, and that's got to change to address the gun violence problem you've asked about.
To make a comment or a question. Hurt people, and we don't act in a preventative way to help children and families heal. In the time the children are very young, they're going to ultimately end up taking actions that Councilman Wilson described. And there are so many children in such dire situations in this community that see only violence all day long. And if we don't change their perspective, that is their only perspective. So that's my only comment on it. So I'm totally switching gears. This is for John and Wanda. Why are there so few people our age in this discussion and in this room? And how can we get more, can I call it young? Are we allowed to be young philanthropists? You know,
My daughter's turning 18.
youngish. How can we encourage more folks in our generation to spend more time giving back to their community in any way that they want? I don't care how they do it, but how can we do that?
Well, you know, how to encourage? Well, I guess as Jeffrey's mom said, most of my friends are very in touch with the community. They do a lot of community service. And so I think that's a benefit of the company that I keep. But I think that oftentimes, you know, our generation, if we're caught in working one job, two jobs, if we're raising children, we're trying to navigate, you know, this pandemic and this economy, that we have not made that a priority to give back or to seek out opportunities. So, you know, you meet people where they are. So what is it that our generation likes to do? You know, where is our generation? I think if we can answer those questions, we could probably seek out some better opportunities for service. There are citywide opportunities like Paint Your Heart Out that a lot of organizations get involved in. There are other opportunities to adopt schools. I have organizations where, you know, we work in Cattle Heights, we work at Westwood Elementary School, we go in and do mentoring programs, or, you know, we go in and I'll be reading at Linwood Charter School in a couple of weeks. So I think that, you know, those of us who do service, those of us who give in the community, I think we need to reach out more to our generation and ask them to get involved. Because a lot of times people have not been asked to do anything. You know, if you don't know that there's something going on here. I had someone tell me just the other day, I take a group of medical students once a month or twice a month, and we volunteer at the hub. One of my medical students brought that to my attention, and we do an educational program, we do the feeding, the family meal on Tuesdays, and I had a friend tell me just yesterday, like, please invite me so I can be a part of that. So I think that for those of us who volunteer in the community, that make it a point to do something good, I think we need to, more times than not, bring somebody else along so that that person can get that experience and see that there's so many different avenues to give, and it's, you know, time, talent, and treasure. And everyone doesn't have treasure, but everyone does have a little bit of time, and we all have a talent. And so when we bring others along with us to see the pure joy that we have in helping somebody else, I think it sparks that fire to help.
I think the real problem is seeing groups, I can't speak about men because I'm really not around men in my day-to-day life, but I do see numbers of young women who are either on the tennis court or having lunch or whatever that have a lot of free time and are not giving back. And I don't know them personally, so I can't say, come along with me, you know, and do this. But it's a real source of frustration for me, and always has been as an adult. Even back to college, when I saw, you know, friends in college not giving back in any way. And I've never really found a solution to this. And if anybody has any real suggestions of how to get these men and women, I'm just not around the men, but these people that have plenty of time and have resources, but they're not using them for the betterment of the community. I'm really looking for answers to that.
Men waste plenty of time as well. Don't. Look. I guess I think part of the solution is giving people opportunities to serve and explaining and convincing them that you are not asking for destructive sacrifice. You're not asking them to put down their nets and follow you for life and devote their entire time and energy to whatever cause it is you think they should be giving their time to. I mean, not everybody's going to be the executive director of the community foundation. Not everybody's going to be able to give in that way, but to the point that everybody up here has made tonight, everybody can do something, and we need to make sure that everybody from the ladies on the tennis court to the men who are sitting at the Shreveport Club 3 nights a week, it's a fine group, drinking scotch. Look, whoever those people are who have not yet found their opportunity to contribute, I think you've got to do it in a way that you don't want to shame people. You know, you definitely don't want to approach people and say, look at you, you're wasting your life and you ought to be doing what I think you should be doing, because that's just not effective. But I do think you can bring people along if you convey to them some of the satisfaction that comes with service. To Mr. Raspberry's point, some of the alleviation of guilt for not doing that comes with service, right? And I think to do that, sometimes you have to be willing to talk about the work you yourself have done in a way that's not braggadocious, but helps them understand what they're missing. If we could just get everybody to do a little bit, we transform the city, and I think that's the goal. Incremental contribution from everybody who can give.
I think maybe last question, Gary. Are there a lot more questions? Raise your hand if you have a question other than right here.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay, Helen. We'll do 2 more questions, or we'll try and get finished in the next 10 minutes or so.
All right. Just a thought on what y'all are talking about right now. I think that if people feel that they're part of a group doing something, like if you say, well, I've got 5 of my friends and we're going to go paint this house together, and let's go have drinks afterwards, or I'm going to bring sandwiches. If you make it more of a social thing, and I know that sounds like, why should you have to do that? But you have to do that sometimes. And definitely asking people. They just won't, if you have a blanket request, you'll maybe have one person come. But if I was to go through and ask every single one of these people, then I guarantee probably about half of them. But that's just my thought. But this is my other question. I do a lot of work with poverty, the juvenile justice system, because my son Clay Walker is very involved in that. Volunteers for Youth Justice is very involved in that whole thing. And my perception is that the community really does not care about that group of people. That their parents should be taking care of them, and they're not. They're poor, and they need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, although they don't have any bootstraps to pull themselves up by. And what they really lack is hope. It's not the existence we had growing up, riding our bikes and all our friends are out and then we go home and have a nice meal, and that's not what these kids are going through. And to just say, well, it's somebody else's fault is a big, to me, that's an attitude that is going to keep our city down and poor and separated by race. And I don't know if y'all got some ideas or comments about that.
Funding early childhood education, as Ms. Gustafson persistently and constantly encourages us to do, is the best solution I know about that. I mean, we'll spend 10x on incarcerating people, but we won't spend 1x educating them as preschoolers. It's the most backwards, ineffectual model that you could come up with, but that's what we do. And so, convince all your politician friends like Commissioner Chavez who are going places that when they get there, they need to make that a priority. I don't know how you make people care about others, but we absolutely, as a city and as a society, need to devote more resources to young children so that we meet their needs during their most critical formative years, rather than waiting for them to suffer the ravages of poverty and then punishing them for behaving in ways that result from that experience.
What I wanted to talk about was optimism. Probably in the last 20 years, I've not been as optimistic about Shreveport as I am now. The business opportunities, the things that are happening are not getting enough attention. And we continue to talk about, and we do need to address the negative things, the problem areas, one by one, and address them. But if we're talking about a unification possibility, we need to find ways to celebrate the positive things that are happening right around us. And I don't have the answer for that other than that we talk about it, and most of the organizations to which I'm a member, I'm celebrating the 30 and 40-year-olds that are making this happen. Because there's been a big gap, where not a lot happened. So whatever we can do to celebrate and unify around the things that are happening as we speak, that I think will help lift us up, provide jobs, provide opportunities, provide hope, provide unification for people to want to either come back or to come to Shreveport. That's where I want to spend my next decade.
I'd like to respond to that. Maybe we have not involved the local media enough in our efforts. Perhaps some of the community leaders, especially Community Foundation and other community leaders, could have a forum with the media and say, you have an important role in making this a great community. Let's see you assert your energies and give time to promoting the city. And I think most of the media, members of the media would be responsive. In my knowledge, we have never really gone to the media to ask for the media's help in this situation. And I think that could be a big help in turning around perceptions.
Jeffrey, your brother just challenged the next meeting.
city and the front page of the newspaper by, generating a negative headline. Sometimes that's necessary, but the good things don't make the news at all, or they're buried just because they're not as salacious and don't drive the same ratings. Like Christy said, it's of course important for the media to report the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we could use a little more of the good around here. But I agree that we ought to encourage that's right. That's right. I agree with that sentiment.
With that, I wanted to suggest a pause on the discussion until next time. I wanted to thank all of you for making the time to come to this. As I explained at the outset, this is the first of a number of these we hope to do, community-focused discussions. There's obviously a lot more ground to cover. This exceeded my expectations. I hope it, at the very least, met yours, and I thank all of you for being a part.
Yeah, please do. I mean it. Yeah.